How's it going? So I'm going to show you a cool way to use accumulator function, well, reduce method to build objects. So it's very complex. I'll explain it to you, but then I'll build it from scratch. So in here we have array of numbers. We're going to reduce it to an object that has two keys, value and value2. Now see, in the middle we are using a function to pass in values, do something in that function, and then return accumulator object, right? Now because this accumulator object returns accumulator object, it automatically gets assigned into accumulator automatically. Okay, so you see, in the first one, I know it's giga confusing, but I will explain it to you shortly, right? So you see, we are passing an argument, which is iteration, right? And then accumulator, which is this thing here. Well, let me do it with single object. It'll be easier to understand, because it's too much stuff, you know. It gets confusing. Okay, so we have an object with value in it, right? Element is these things here. We're passing the element and accumulator, which is this object, into this function here. We then, from the accumulator, extract the value and then add current value plus whatever the argument is. And then we return the accumulator, which is this thing. Now, because we are returning this object, it gets automatically passed as an accumulator, and then we just return accumulator, and then as a result we get value 15. Right? I know it's a bit confusing, but let's do it step by step. Okay, so let's remove everything. Yeah, so big note, it only works on primitives. Yeah, so I'm gonna let me do to do, right? To do. Show how it works. Show only works. Whoopsie. Show only works on primitives. Now the reason why it converts into a different color, it's called colored comments extension. So if you do like this, it will become red. You see, it becomes red. If you do to do, it becomes like this. If you do like this, it becomes a different shade of green. So to do, and then finally multi-key object. Alright, so let's do simple reduce. So let's do A equals to array reduce. We want accumulator and we want value. Or item. I don't know, probably people call it item, right? You always want to return accumulator in this type of scenarios, and let's put it as 0. And then we want accumulator is equal to accumulator plus item. So what does that give us? That gives us 15, right? So this should give us 15. Yeah. So this is primitive, right? Now, the second way of doing this, non-primitives here. Okay, so let's say we want to create an object. So let's do value. Let's do key. I don't know. Full 1. Well, let's do value full 0. Right? So now we do accumulator dot value full is equal to accumulator that value foo. And then this will give us 15. Now you can simply build a function to do it. So function add foo, like this. We're gonna pass, let's say, accumulator and then value item in here. And then we can do accumulator dot value foo equals. We're basically doing literally this in here. Like this. Accumulator. Yeah. And now we're gonna call this function in here. Like this. And then we're gonna pass accumulator and item into it. So now you will see that the value of foods becomes 15. Right? It should. Yeah, you see? So now we have a separate function to do this, and because it's returning accumulator, it gets automatically kind of like joined into this object here, if that makes sense. Now, for small things like this, it's a kind of waste of time to build a separate function, but if you have multiple keys, so let's say we have value foo2 0, right? You will notice that it still calculates for value for foo, but it does not affect value foo in value foo2 in any way, right? So you can imagine we have like, I don't know, 15 different values, and in this bug that we're fixing, we just want to fix the value of foo and not the value of other foos, if that makes sense. Well, let's do value bar 0, right? So you will see that it's not being, it's only working for this. So let's say we're working with our UI, and we come across a bug where the value of bar is missing something, right? So we can build a function like add bar, for example, right? Accumulator. Well, let's say we want to use bar value somewhere in our UI, and we need to build it separately. So we can do exactly the same thing, and it will have a different value. So let's say we do, so this will be value bar, and then value bar plus item, let's say plus 2, right? And then we're gonna call this in here with same arguments. And you will see that this will be now completely different. Do you see how, like, you do not need to work with the entire object? You can just work with portions of the object and then return the object, and it automatically gets joined into a single object, which is this thing here, as long as you're returning it in here. Does that make sense? So I'll show you where we used it, like where I used it in my daily life as a programmer. Now it's a little bit scary, don't get scared. Like, okay, look, you see we have a data calculator, right? We have accumulator and we have row. Each row is basically an API that has about 7,000, I think it's like 7,000 vehicles or something, and each vehicle is an object that has about 20 keys inside of it. Right, so you can imagine like working with single object at the same time with on every iteration is like it's close to impossible. Do you know what I mean? So what you do, you use a reduce function. You see, you have your object at the end, and then you build your small helper functions to populate this object depending what you want. Right, so for example, I want to get vehicles by make. I want to know how many Mercedes, how many, I don't know, Porsches or whatever, Ferraris are inside the object, so I do it in here, you see. I do not need to kind of recreate the entire object, add stuff into it, and then return that object. I can just return the portions. So you see, we have get vehicles by make in here, and it only returns the portion that I want, because we are targeting vehicles by make, right? So I'm just telling you that it's every day you're gonna be using it, like within your everyday programming life. So it's the same in here. You see, we have a gigantic object. Well, it's not gigantic, but I mean, in this case, it's small. But and you can build functions to populate that object in portions, as opposed to the whole thing, right? And that's about it, pretty much. I will probably link in the description below this document here, so you get to have the code. Three key object. So you will have kind of like have the code, so you can play around with it, you know. Okay, so this is done. Now I will show you that it only works on. So I also done multi-key object. Now it only works on objects and not primitives, right? So I had to show this to you. Well, let's do it this way. Let's say we have 0 in here. We remove add full. We just leave add full. Okay. So now let's just console log this out. We'll remove this out. Comment it out. Okay. So accumulator is equal to accumulator plus value. So now this is gonna be 15. We're back to square one. Item. My apologies. So we're back to 15. Now, if you try to do this inside the foo function just by itself, it will not work because you are returning a primitive. And then we're gonna call it in here. Like this. Accumulator item. Like this. Now this will be 0. You will see that it's not gonna work. It shouldn't work, I think. Yeah. You see, because this 0, it's returning accumulator from here, not from here. Do you see? That's the problem. So every time it's just returning incorrect accumulator. And since accumulator is always 0, nothing is happening. So that's why this is always 0. The way to fix that is you want to tell the function to use the correct accumulator. So you say accumulator equals, now it's going to work. Right? Because you have to remember how, because there's return by value in primitives, because primitives return by value. And functions and objects, they return by, oh, I forgot, by, one sec, I need to remember this. Yeah, by reference. So, you want to research return by value versus return by reference, then you will kind of have a good understanding of why this is happening. Alright. I'm gonna link, I have 2 videos, I think, on return by value, return by reference. I'm gonna link them in the description below so you can kind of understand what I'm talking about. It's fundamentally very, very important topic in JavaScript, otherwise you're gonna get confused sometimes. Why some values are being converted and others do not. That's because object functions and arrays are returned by reference. Whereas things like string, number, boolean is returned by reference, by value. Right? So primitives are value, functions, arrays, and objects are by reference. And that's a very, very critical kind of, you need to understand how it works to be good at JavaScript, okay? Take care, bye-bye.